Hello, Wake Up NZ. Let's look at the tyranny and the human rights abuses that actually sit on the Human Rights Council in the UN. So, there are 47 members on the UN Human Rights Council, and there's an electioneering process where it's done in secrecy. So there's two practices within that electioneering, and they are clean slate ballots and secret voting, trade voting. I rub your back, you rub mine. I'll vote you onto that council if you do this for me. And this is quite regular occurrences. So clean slate ballots, what are they? Well, that's when a number of candidates is equal to the number of vacant seats on the UNHRC. So, by 4 or 5 UN regional groups, the UN General Assembly elects the members by majority vote to serve on the council in staggered 3-year terms. The seats are apportioned using the UN regional grouping system. So when the UN Human Rights Council seats are available within a regional group, like could be Asia Pacific, etc., the region puts forth a ballot on who these eligible UN member states for the UN General Assembly vote. However, the regional blocs will frequently only put forth the same number of candidates as there are seats, so there's no competition. This is called a clean slate. Effectively, clean slates eliminate choice among those that vote on the UN Assembly as to what country should become a UN Human Rights Council member. Shifting the power to regional blocs to independently decide which country will occupy available seats on the UN Human Rights Council without a competitive ballot of electioneering of members of UNHRC votes. Well, they're rendered essentially as clean slates, making a mockery of the election and undermining the quality of those that sit on the Human Rights Council. So there's no competition, there's no choice. This just happens. So without competitive balloting as to electioneering, you have votes are rendered essentially meaningless. Whether they have human rights abuses records or not, they don't take that into account. It's just a mockery of the elections that undermines the quality of those that sit on the UN Human Rights Council. So this secret voting, electing UN member states onto the UN Human Rights Council, cast in secret, mandated by the Human Rights Charter, allowing each member to vote anonymously. Secret voting makes it nearly impossible to hold member states to account, responsible for consideration on which country is a human rights contributor. Do they have good human rights records or not? So there's this criteria of bias that's making vote trading harder to track, but easier to conceal. So vote trading involves secret deals, political bargaining, exchanging support for seats or resolutions, often undermining UNHRC's mission by electing human rights abusers and prioritising political blocs like the Arab Islamic states over that of actual human rights themselves. So through powerful nations, they still influence outcomes. So we're talking about some time back, there was an example of involving UK, Saudi Arabia, China, and Russia undermining credibility. So there's also what you call logrolling. Countries trade votes on specific resolutions or for seats on the UN Human Rights Council. So if there is a resolution, say, against Israel, for instance, genocide, South Africa, they could be trading votes with Iran, and that's just what they did. So this is the most common form, which involves an exchange of votes for different uses. So the UN Assembly elects UN member states to the Human Rights Council by majority vote. Okay, so the elected membership to UN Human Rights Council is open to all member states. Requires electioneering to take into account the candidates as to the promotion and protection of human rights, as in the UN Charter. But human rights abusers are voted onto the Human Rights Council. This undermines the work of the Human Rights Council itself. It makes a mockery of it. So you have political deals. UN member states make informal agreements for votes. Bloc voting. Regional groups like the Islamic nations often vote in bloc votes, leveraging oil and political power to elect members and to influence resolutions at the UN Human Rights Council. So what they could do is trade a vote. For a small nation, you could say, and they're not very well off, you could say, okay, you vote me in to the UN Human Rights Council and I'll give you aid, trade aid, or we'll give you a subsidy, we'll give you aid, we'll help you out. And that's the sort of thing that happens. So principled voting, urging UN member states to vote based on candidates' adherence to the human rights standards, even if it means leaving ballots blank due to unfit candidates, we're better to do that. There is no competition as to whether a country is human rights abusers or not. Because all this secrecy, this trade voting, this log rolling, the political deals that all go on. And this is not just happens only once in a while. This is quite a regular thing. So you have membership elections. Vote trading is particularly common during the annual Human Rights Council membership elections, when another bids for a seat on the UN Human Rights Council, often irrespective of the candidate's human rights record, in return for reciprocal support on other issues. So you might have a country who wants support on another issue, and they will trade that for another country to vote for them, and they will vote for them onto the UN Human Rights Council. So material benefits, they can use material benefits. In some cases, wealthier and more powerful nations may offer material benefits such as foreign aid or trade concessions, exchange for votes from developing countries. So vote trading undermines credibility, compromises human rights, and it mandates to uphold the highest standard of human rights by allowing states with poor human rights records to actually secure seats on the Human Rights Council. And this is what's happening. It's not about whether this country has good human rights, whether they have bad human rights. It's just a matter of trading, dealing. It's criminal, but they don't see it as criminal and they allow it. So as you get the human rights approach right across the world, and everything is about the human rights approach when they talk about Agenda 21, 2030, whatever it is, it's always human rights approach. But you look at the UN Human Rights Council and their vote trading, their log rolling, their secret ballots, etc. So civil society organisations, some UN member states, have consistently urged to end this vote trading. They advocate for competitive elections so that these countries have to really show that they do have good human rights records. So that is happening, but it's not happening yet. So this is continuing. These abusive human rights countries, states, set on the Human Rights Council. Greater transparency. We do not have transparency when it comes to this because it's all done secretly. So vote trading at the UN General Assembly is a corrupt practice, but it's allowed. It's a mechanism for vote trading, and it frequently occurs behind closed doors because this is done in secrecy. So you could get close to states where a number of candidates match the number of available seats for the region, effectively guaranteeing election onto the UN Human Rights Council. Because you could have 2 seats available and they just put two members forward as for those seats. So there's no competition. So you've got these deals allow countries with poor human rights records such as Saudi Arabia, China, Russia to secure seats despite failing to meet the UN's own membership criteria for human rights standards. So we've got leaked cables in a prominent case highlighted by UN Watch. Leaked 2013 diplomatic cables revealed a secret deal between UK and Saudi Arabia, where they exchanged votes to ensure both were elected to the UN Human Rights Council. So where do we go from here when we've got the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council itself, as being corrupt? And this is what has happened. So if you look at who's on the Human Rights Council now, go to that, do your research, do a bit more digging, and you will find there are many human rights abusers there. So just opening it up to the secrecy behind the doors of the UN Human Rights Council and this whole UN Human Rights Council approach worldwide. And we countries, states, rely on the UN Human Rights Council. That has many human rights abusers. This is how corrupt it is. Wake up, New Zealand.